To me, Turkey has never experienced a period when lightweight construction systems were so much needed. Now, especially in Turkey, where pile driving in earthquake zones is very risky and expensive, takes a long time, where the ground must not shake for the concrete to dry, and the ground is constantly shaking with aftershocks. We cannot bring systems that can be built with wood and light steel to the agenda. I think Turkey needs to put this issue on its agenda in an accelerated way and make use of it in earthquake zones. I think it will take a long time for the construction industry and the design industry in Turkey to digest what sustainability means in terms of these three issues. The reason for this is construction is Turkey's driving sector in economic terms. And we're talking about such a big industry, such a big sector together with its side branches, including architecture. There are probably 200 architecture schools graduating architects. They are talking about 80,000 architects registered to the Chamber of Architects, the number of which we do not know exactly. There are also those who are not registered, and all are doing business in the market in some way. So even if not all of them, so when we look at the market, we see that the concept of sustainability, which we call environmental sensitivity and green architecture, has become a bit too popular. But I think the knowledge of designing and making environmentally sensitive, climate-sensitive architecture is still far behind what it should be in Turkey. I studied in the US for a year in high school. There I experienced something I'll never forget. They built a huge, very luxurious wooden frame villa in 2 weeks opposite the house I lived in. And I used to babysit the children of the owners of that house. I took care of their kids. I used to go there and back, but one day a group of men came with trucks, and in a very cold region of America, like Illinois, they erected the carcass in 3 days only. They closed it extremely fast. Insulation materials. Of course, I was not an architect yet back then, but I saw with my own eyes how fast such a dwelling, it was a dentist's house, could be finished in 2 weeks in a light way. That's why this concept directly reminds me of that. But of course, we have an earthquake zone issue that we are dealing with very deeply right now. And in this earthquake zone, Hatay, the most devastated Hatay, is right next to Iskenderun iron and steel factory. And steel is used relatively little in Turkey at the moment, as almost everything in our gigantic construction sector is carried out through reinforced concrete steel, cannot be considered an alternative even in a place where the foundation is so problematic. When you try to talk about it, they say it is costly, but 300,000 houses need to be built there, and there is a factory so close to it. In fact, there must be another math to this. It is said that Turkey does not have the habit of doing this. It knows reinforced concrete and can do it fast. We need to build houses there very fast. Steel requires more skilled labor, even to build light steel houses. I think this can also be learned and taught quickly. So I don't think Turkey has ever experienced a period when lightweight construction systems were so much needed. Right now, especially in Turkey's earthquake zone, where pile driving is too risky and expensive, takes a long time, where the ground must not shake for the concrete to dry, and the ground is constantly shaking with aftershocks. We cannot bring systems that can be made with wood and light steel to the agenda. agenda. We lack knowledge and experience, but these are actually opportunities to make such things happen. I think Turkey needs to put this issue on its agenda in an accelerated manner and make the earthquake zones benefit from it. In the last 3-4 years, the geography has expanded to southeastern Anatolia. I'm an architect who had the chance to have a very pleasant experience with volcanic tuff, especially in Cappadocia, for around 20 years. And of course, we mostly learned from our masters, especially in cases like Cappadocia, where the ground is rock and very soft, and ecological rock with cavities and high insulation value, and where many restoration works are carried out in traditional villages with the stone obtained from there, are not things we learn from teaching of architecture. These are the experiences we have gained by combining the education and crafting knowledge of the two sides, by learning from the masters in the field. Everywhere in Turkey, I see it when I work in Halfeti in Urfa. There is such a great know-how that comes from tradition, and the quarries are still there. There are craftsmen who know how to do it. We need a perspective that will focus on lower, more humane settlements by spreading this knowledge by learning from the knowledge of masonry construction that is already widespread throughout Turkey, and the knowledge of mixed construction. There are different beautiful villages in each region. The pandemic triggered this to some extent, but I don't know how much, and I don't know the statistics. Huge tiny house settlements, villa sites, etc. are being built everywhere, but you want each of these to be done with the right policies. In Turkey, we still have probably the world's richest variety of masonry building knowledge and wood frame construction knowledge, so we can still obtain this from Anatolia and history. There are people living in these, especially in places where tourism is as developed as in Cappadocia. This knowledge can be expanded, developed and sustained. Focusing on this would indeed be an important gain for Turkey. Now, when we discuss historical buildings, especially with conservation boards, the most common thing we face is a nostalgic romanticism that does not stand on its feet. Oh, how beautiful it was here! I wish everywhere had been houses like this. I wish they had stayed as they were. Those houses became empty because your parents and grandparents were not happy there. Living in those houses is not as it seems. The plaster on the walls is falling off, the ceilings are leaking, the roof insulation costs a lot of money. The water coming from the foundation cannot be dealt with. Especially if you are no longer stock breeding, if you live in other economic conditions, etc. Due to the increasing difficulty of living conditions, those houses were declared disaster areas after the 60s, and people were transferred to new concrete modern houses without stairs. So, inevitably, when they are transformed again with other functions and given a new life, we are dealing with imagining and implementing the designs that are required by that function, especially starting from the wet areas in the interior spaces. For example, what do I pay attention to? I pay attention to this. Ours is not a country like Italy. I mean, in Italy, as they have preserved 95% of the country very well, there is no work for architects there. Italian architects make do with interiors and industrial design. So when you visit Italy, you can go back 400 years inside and outside these places. So cities, villages, textures give you that feeling. But inside you can see many different experiments. I think in Turkey this is not the case. In Turkey, on the contrary, we have destroyed 95% of our heritage. I believe we must preserve the remaining 5% very radically. That's why, let's say, if I'm building a hotel in a place like Cappadocia, if I'm reorganizing the streets and interiors of that hotel, my motivation is not to transform it with shiny materials to make it feel new and make it look like the ones in Switzerland. There, I tell the story of the medieval town, on the one hand on the streets, in the exteriors, and on the other hand in the interiors. I tell the story that comes from the simplicity of rural life, from the way it looks, but of course by gentrifying it a bit, using wood accordingly, using ceramics accordingly, using linen fabric accordingly. You are in a rural village in Cappadocia. We don't want you to see a contemporary space in this hotel that you would see when you go to France. We don't want you to get away from the feeling of being in Cappadocia. I try to maintain such a design approach. They call it the spirit of the space. They also call it genius logic. But I try to act with a consistency that the people there will feel the story of the place when they enter the place and when they walk around its streets. Carlos Scarpa is at my top one. In other words, Carlos Scarpa is my idol. I want to pat everything he does like I pat silk. As for today, there are many architects I admire, whose work I follow with great admiration. But focusing on the field I'm in, I'll tell you my faves, or there will be no end to this. Peter Zumthor is of course another idol for me. I mean everything he does, the way he touches a place, the way he relates to the material, the feeling he conveys to us with the spaces he makes for himself is very valuable to me. Of course, Zaha Hadid is one of the architects that I follow from an entirely different perspective again in her own context, with much love and inspiration. I also love Herzog de Meuron's work. I love the way they relate to and play with materials. I love many of MVRDV's works in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, especially their work in the new residences in Venice. There are many, of course, many, but I guess these are enough.